Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Jordan Schnitzer Family Foundation Lecture, which is organized by the International Fine Print Dealers Association. We have the director of the organization over here, Jenny Gibbs, who coordinated everything with the members of the board for the entire fair. And we are delighted to have you all. This afternoon is going to be very exciting. The title of the event this afternoon is A Conversation with Hank Willis Thomas, who is sitting over here, and Jordan Schnitzer. I'm going to give a brief introduction to both men. Jordan Schnitzer grew up in Portland and is a graduate of the University of Oregon. And in 1976, he received his law degree from the Northwestern School of Law at Lewis and Clark College. Shortly thereafter, he began working full-time in his family's real estate company, Harsh Investment Properties, a Portland-based real estate acquisition, development, and management company which was started by his father in 1950. Now, this is not an economics lecture. I just want you to know that. With a staff of over 250 professionals, Jordan has built Harsh Investment Properties into one of the largest privately held real estate property and management companies in the Western United States. In addition to his role as president at Harsh, he is a major benefactor on many civic and cultural boards. Those of us who know Jordan's passion for prints and the arts know that this inspiration emanated from Jordan's late mother, Arlene Schnitzer, who was the founder and director of the Fountain Gallery, which was established specifically to showcase artists in the Pacific Northwest. The Fountain has been called Portland's first serious art gallery. Jordan still has the first painting he bought in 1965, entitled Sanctuary, an abstract study by Louis Bunce. He bought it at his mother's gallery, and the painting cost $75, but there was a family discount, and he bought it for $60 and had to pay $5 a month. He also learned that if he missed a payment, his mother could foreclose because his bedroom was next to hers. Creating a vast lending library of prints happened somewhat surreptitiously. 30 years ago, while browsing in a gallery that specialized in works on paper, he bought a Frank Stella, a David Hockney, and a Jim Dine. That sparked his magnificent obsession that continues to this day. He says prints are more affordable than paintings, and he stated something that many of us at this fair would say: they reflect the collaboration between the artist and the printmaker. And so he began collecting contemporary prints and multiples in earnest in 1988. Today, his art collection is composed of 15,000 prints and 5,000 paintings, sculptures, and other works of art. It includes artworks by many of today's most important post-war artists and has grown to be the country's largest private print collection. He and his family foundation have most generously lent artwork from the collection to qualified institutions in locations where it is very difficult to get exhibitions by leading American artists. And to date, they have organized over 180 exhibitions, which have been exhibited in 160 museums. How did this program of the talk begin today? Several years ago, Dick Solomon approached Jordan and asked him if he would support the Jordan Schnitzer Family Foundation lecture for the International Fine print dealers. And I want to say that on behalf of everyone who is at the fair, everyone on the board, everyone on the foundation, we are all extraordinarily grateful for Jordan supporting this event. He is passionate about prints, and he also funds many other extraordinary programs. Tonight, for example, the Print Center is opening a new gallery entitled the Jordan Schnitzer Gallery. So I hope that many of you will have time to go over the weekend or tonight or in the coming weeks and months. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Jordan described his collecting passion for more than 3 decades in assembling what he calls a teaching collection of prints, largely by American artists of the post-World War period. Instead of hanging the works of art at home or keeping them in storage, he established the foundation that lends to museums with a special focus of getting the works out in front of young people. Many of his loans are to small museums, institutions, and universities. And all these museums are beneficiaries of his generosity. His foundation goes one step further. They cover the costs of framing and shipping the works, preparing brochures and educational materials, and even hors d'oeuvres at the opening receptions. Jordan has said, "Watching the visitors react to the images, I felt a joy and feel a joy that I have never felt before." I am now going to turn to our guest here this afternoon, Hank Willis Thomas. It is an it's an honor to have you, Hank. Hank Willis Thomas is a conceptual artist working primarily with themes related to perspective, identity, commodity, media, and popular culture. His work has been exhibited throughout the United States and abroad, including the International Center for Photography in New York, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, the Musée Quai du Quai Branly, Paris, the Hong Kong Arts Center in Hong Kong, and the Witty de With Center for Contemporary Art in the Netherlands. His work is included in numerous public collections, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Guggenheim, the Whitney, the High Museum in Atlanta, the National Gallery of Washington, D.C. His collaborative projects include such projects such as Question Bridge, Black Males in Search of the Truth Booth, and For Freedoms, which was awarded the 2017 ICP Infinity Award for New Media and Online Platform. In 2012, Question Bridge, Black Males, debuted at the Sundance Film Festival and was selected for the New Media Grant at the Tribeca Film Institute. He is also the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Soros Equality Fellowship, and has been a member of the New York City Public Design Commission. He holds a BFA from NYU and an MFA from the California Institute of Arts, and has been honored with honorary doctorates from the Maryland Institute for Art and the Institute for Doctoral Studies at the Visual Arts in 2017. Please welcome Jordan Schnitzer and Hank Willis Thomas in conversation.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you. This is exciting for me because I've been buying Hank's work for maybe 7, 8, 9 years now, and I got the chance to really read a lot more about him and even expand further my respect and admiration and just passion for his work. So thank you for agreeing to talk with us today. You know, the New Yorker said about you, in an interview about you and your mother, said, growing up in a Black history archive. Now your mother, PhD, historian, artist, she was dean at the NYU photography and imaging department. Your father, a scientist, musician, real estate investor. You grew up in Manhattan. So as this said, what was it like growing up? Let's talk about your earliest years in a Black history, as they say, archive. What was growing up like for you?
Well, first of all, I'm so grateful to be here with you. It's just been a joy to see, definitely this throughout the year since we've been back more often through the pandemic, getting to see how big your heart is, how much you care about art, artists, and people in general. And so I was surprised to be invited here, but now I know that I'm your favorite artist. You're my favorite collector. But it's just a wonderful thing to be able to spend time with people again. I'm still conscious about getting breathed on and breathing on people, but it seems like we're all kind of up for the challenge and the risk of living, which is why we are here. And I grew up as the child of two artists who really were the first generation of African Americans who were able to kind of live out their own dreams. You know, prior to my grandparents' generation were, born. My father was born into a segregated South, but my grandparents were born into an entirely segregated country. And what I learned through my parents' journey is that we have the capacity against all odds to make our dreams come true when we love ourselves, when we love others, and when we're willing to put ourselves out there. I got the fortune of growing up at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, which is in Harlem on 135th Street, where my mother was curator of prints and photographs. And I got to meet, incredible artists like Gordon Parks and James Vanderzee as a child, and James Baldwin, et cetera, and so many other people who would be coming to the Schomburg, because especially at that time, Black artists weren't really welcome many places, even in this city. It was normal to be surrounded by Carrie Mae Weems and Lorna Simpson and people who are now household names as a child, and most people didn't know who they were or possibly even care. But I got the privilege of that being my kind of central identity, is growing up within the community of artists who knew that through their care and consideration for each other, support of each other's work, that whether or not society embraced them or not, they had something valuable. And that really kind of has been something that's been a theme throughout my work, is really looking at people and stories and images that maybe were kind of only seen in a very specific light at one time, and introducing them into different conversations today.
And his mother also was a MacArthur Fellow in 2002. And you sent me a picture that the Smithsonian is honoring her with a wing or a building or
a gallery at the American Art Museum.
Yeah, really wonderful. And they're not here today because you have a cousin that had a baby yesterday?
2 days ago,
2 days ago, okay. Yeah. And we should also mention your wife, Rue, who is a curator at the Whitney and helped curate the biennial, the one 2 years ago.
Correct. And, and most recently, the Julie Moretu show that was up at the Whitney.
So when did you first decide you wanted to be an artist?
I'm still deciding whether or not I want to be an artist. It does feel like I'm living in a dream world, because the idea that I could come up with an idea, and I believe artists are alchemists, and also to some degree kind of in a different era would have been shamans or psychics, because most of what we do is we imagine something and literally kind of culminate all of this energy using different kinds of materials to bring it into physical existence. And that's just crazy, and I never, because my mother reminds me that I used to tell her I never wanted to be an artist because all of her friends were broke. But that was also part of my training, that I didn't actually start to really I didn't have my own home until I was like 36, 37. But I had my parents' couches and other friends' couches. But it was really because I recognized that the journey of being an artist had more. Most people, no one goes into making art to make money. You know, you go into it because you truly believe in what you're doing. And so I always tell people, if you want to make a living as an artist, don't be realistic, because the chances that you'll actually make a living aren't realistic. And so putting reality outside makes space for our dreams to really manifest.
We're going to talk about your art in a little bit and go through a lot of slides, which are absolutely fabulous. And then what you'll see there is you're so multifaceted. I mean, you work in film, paintings, prints, reflective materials. We'll get into that a little more too. Was there something in your childhood? You know, it talks here about how you loved the Dukes of Hazzard show, and one of his amazing works that I still said I need to buy was at the Kane Griffin Gallery in L.A., and it's a Duke of Hazzard car with a Confederate flag on the back of it from that Dukes of Hazzard show that some of us older people here remember. But that you grew up loving that show, and Bo and Luke and the characters, and you also liked little G.I. Joes. Were there formative things there in terms of your play and toys that you think helped also shape and form you into what you do today?
Well, it's funny because my friends, Frank Hooker and David Dotson, and the kids I grew up with in this Schaumburg, we would be in the Schaumburg Center for Research in Black Culture with the Dukes of Hazzard car and G.I. Joe action figures, and no one even thought it was even at all problematic that we were literally in the stacks, like riding our cars on prints and objects. So it probably made these things, all of these worlds blend for me in a unique way. But it is amazing to think about how popular culture is also a form of brainwashing and social conditioning. Young men are often conditioned to fantasize around violence and war in our society through the toys we are encouraged to play with. And then also the fact that the General Lee was the first kind of toy car that I really loved, and I still have a passion for it, says a lot about the way that our society can prime people for things that may actually be contradictory to their whole existence.
You in a Guardian magazine article, you said about Black Lives Matter, you said the work will not be complete in our lifetime. Also, another important event there, I think, was the unfortunate death of your cousin that you were closest to growing up. And he was 22, was he not?
27, I was 23. Yeah,
you were 23, he was 27. Describe that, and you've talked to me before about how that influenced and shaped a lot of your direction since.
Sure. Well, I always talk about love in my work and in my life because I was not good at most things when I was a kid. Or maybe even now. However, I've figured out how to do a lot because I understand the currency of love. And my cousin Sunga was like the cool person, the tall, good-looking, charming, all smart, all of the things. And I was and that one. But he saw both the problematics with the fact that I was so easily dismissed, and also the importance of sharing whatever light was shined on him onto other people. And he really just, I think about him every day and think about how he walked the earth with this kind of belief. He'd say, I'm the richest poor man alive, was one of his mottos, because he had so much love in his pocket. Unfortunately, he was murdered on February 2nd, 2000. He was visiting my grandmother while his mother was out of town, saw some friends from junior high school. They said, let's go out. They went out to a club in a city he doesn't really know. The guys were wearing diamond and platinum chains. They left the club separately, but some people spotted him with the guys, and they made him lay face down in the snow while they waited for the other guys to come out of the club. And they robbed the other guys from the chain and then shot him in the back of the head while they didn't take anything from him or us except for his life. And that was pretty devastating for a lot of reasons, not the least of which that it was a teenager who killed him, who, was sentenced to life in prison, and multiple of them. So it wasn't just one life lost, it was many lives lost. But a few weeks after he was killed, one of his friends, his artist, Omar Ramirez, said that he and Sunga were messing around on a microphone and that I might want to hear what they were doing, and one of the last things recorded of him saying was "Love overrules," and I thought that was a perfect message, parting message for him to share with me, and it was like him saying "love over." I wasn't sure if he was saying put love over rules or love overrules, and that has become really my motto. This idea that regardless of the circumstances, which is most beautifully illustrated by his mother, who went to visit the young man who killed her only son, and embraced him while he cried on her shoulders. That there's no scenario where love cannot be generative and healing, and that's basically what my cousin has taught me, my family has taught me, and that I attempt in my own way to share in my life and work.
Thank you for sharing that. I think I always find it interesting to understand what helped motivate and shape someone. So those are intimate things to tell us about. Let's get on with your work a little bit here. And do you want to talk about some of these early works that came from your studio?
Sure. So, well, my studio also really, I was invited by Schnitzer to do an artist residency at the Lower East Side print shop. 12 or more. Well, first I applied and didn't get it, I think. And then they came back and they were like, well, we kind of like you anyway. He did. At least one person did.
That was 2013.
Oh, it was 2000.
That was earlier.
I think it was 13 when I did the residency, 9 when I didn't get it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, see, love. She said, luckily I'm the director, so but we did not know each other. But as a result of that invitation, I got to take my work, which was then primarily photography based, through using inkjet prints and lambda prints and other forms and silver gelatin prints, other forms of photography, and embrace a new medium, which was printmaking. And I got to, through working with various printers there, come in with all these materials that I'd been looking at and playing with and being like, what happens if we apply, in this case, screen printing to this and to this and to this? So we did carborundum, we did so much. But ultimately, I started to learn a lot about Andy Warhol's printing process and his experimentation with historic images, and also using painting as a method to tell stories through repetition. And one of the things I was really drawn to was, I was always fascinated with the civil rights movement and the fact that nonviolence was ultimately the most powerful tool to resist institutional and systematic violence of not only the people in the society, but also the government. And I decided I wanted to highlight that in ways that are invisible. And so this is how the work might look to the naked eye. But if the work was on that wall, for instance, or you saw it with a flash, you'd see another kind of element revealed. And so I had been looking at stop signs or one-way sign. We all look at those. Everyone's seen a stop sign? And at nighttime, if you're in a car, the headlights are on, and you can see the red and white sign, the colors illuminate. But if you're just standing on the sidewalk, you would not see it glowing that way. And I came across that material, and when I brought it to LESP, I was really kind of excited to figure out how I could use this kind of camouflaging technique that happens with retroreflective vinyl, combining it with ink to tell stories. And so this is a piece of this really powerful image that's undated, of an unnamed person around during the civil rights movement. And the reason I think it's so powerful is because history is like this, where it's vague and almost invisible, and then shining a certain light on it, you can kind of get a new perspective on it, and it can be heart-wrenching, it can be moving, and that's kind of where I've always been excited to work. Well, this actually is a piece called Scarred Chest it's from 2003. I actually made a photogravure of this, which was also kind of very exciting kind of way for me to move out of the traditional form of photography that I was used to. But I was thinking a lot about how slaves, and likely some of my ancestors, were branded as a sign of ownership, how cattle are branded as a sign of ownership, and how today we live in a society where we are branded, everything, even the water that we drink, and the cars that we drive, the computer or phone that we use is branded, and in a way it shapes our notion of who we are. And the question is, do we own the products or do the products own us? And this actually is a painting inspired by these screen printed posters from the Memphis Sanitation Workers March in 1968, where there was people holding signs, African American men holding signs in protest of segregation, saying "I am a man," which I was really surprised by, because it was shocking to me that just a few years before I was born, it was so necessary for people who were clearly men to have to affirm their identity that way. And then so I decided to make a series of paintings remixing that to say I'm your man, I'm the man, who's the man, I am a man. And so but my practice really does take all of these different forms, from using elements of historical images or images like this from a 1952 bra ad, which when I digitally remove all of the advertising information, it seems to be a pre-feminist image where this woman is being elected to something.
Well, explain. You did 100 from 1915 to 2015. You picked one ad a year, 100 of them, and then you manipulated them. And we've got about 6 or 8 or 10 of them images.
Yeah. So this is a series called, as I was talking about kind of how popular culture shapes our identities and what we value, I first did a project called Unbranded Reflections of Black Unbranded Reflections of Black. Whoa, wow, what? This is just last night. I was in DC at the Rubel Family Collection, where the entire series. Wow, this is 46. Unbranded Reflections in Black. Oh my God, what? By Corporate America. Thank you. Holy smokes. Where I took 2 images.
We're keeping the audience on their feet.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Help there.
Where I took 2 images from every year from 1968 to 2008, and removed all the advertising, digitally removed all the advertising information in a way to kind of track blackness through the corporate kind of agenda or idea over the course of these 40 years. And it was really fascinating because prior to 1968, black people weren't really marketed to by mainstream society. And to see how that community was framed and spoken to and influenced through advertising or influencing advertising over those 40 years, which happened to be bookended by the symbolic end of the civil rights movement when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and then the symbolic new era marked by the inauguration of Barack Obama. Then a few years later, in that series, I started to see all of these. I started to come across, while I was looking through these images of African Americans, I started to see all of these other images that I was finding in archives and magazines that I also found fascinating. And I started thinking about race and how 100 years ago, most people who we consider white, Irish people, German people, Polish people, Jewish people, Russian people, Armenian people, would not be considered white 100 years ago. And in fact, a lot of people like your ancestors were either just arriving or coming from a place as refugees, and in a way kind of saw whiteness out of this way as this passport out of second-class citizenship. A lot of African Americans also chose to opt out of blackness into whiteness through passing. And I wanted to kind of look at kind of this both construction of whiteness, but also this construction of a white female identity in popular culture through taking, I took one ad, as you said, from 1915 to 2015. So it's called Unbranded, A Century of White Women. And what was fascinating also with these ads, most of the people making ads targeted towards quote unquote white women throughout most of the 20th century were their husbands, right? And so a lot of what we know about female identity is shaped through kind of a man's imagination of what a woman should be, where she belongs, and what she should be valuing. And so this series really was, for me, a really amazing kind of journey and exploration into what American identity was about. This is, I think, this is an early ad from, you said 1934, where, you see a woman both elegant but also behind the wheel of the car. So this is the beginning of a time when women can start to have some kind of autonomy. This is 1972. This is a ad for, anyone want to guess? Yes, Virginia Slims. You've come a long way, baby. And so, of course, this is a point when women's rights were becoming more and more relevant in popular culture, and cigarette companies figured that they knew how to speak to them, put a bow on her head and put her on the the Mount Rushmore. So the series is kind of, especially looking at cigarette ads like this, like you're supposed to be like smoking these cigarettes is like being on a block of ice in the desert, sun tanning. And so when I look at ads, what's so fascinating is what are they really about is revealed when you start to remove the advertising information. Do people know what this is an ad for, right? Not the sofa. Calvin Klein obsession with a prepubescent looking Kate Moss on a couch. This was a way you would sell. Like, this is just, you can see a lot about what we're thinking. This is by, I think, around 2006. And it's potato chips. I guess you can't have just one or something like that. But it's also now women are having options, new kinds of relationships. This was for vodka in 2003. But again, like what are, as young people looking through magazines, what are we learning about gender relationships? And when we see, and what is the buying the product, Sky Vodka meant to imply in this? But then we also see, a different moment in around 2013. This is Serena Williams looking at the Tampax woman and basically dominating her. But there's also another metaphor for kind of black women taking a different role in the game, whatever you call the game. But also this, I think, pretty binary and confrontational depiction of the relationship with two women who might have something in common. And so I've really kind of been fascinated by how all of these other things are hidden beneath the surface of all of these advertisements.
Before we go to the next slide, which is the love rules, can you talk about your practice? Because as I looked at all these images, which all we were lucky enough to have, I sit there thinking, as I'm sure all of you thinking, my gosh, how does he think of this stuff? Where does he find it? Where do you come up with these ideas? I mean, this is amazing the way you're explaining all this to us. And so how...
I could talk all day on those.
What to do? First, your studio practice, what kind of staff do you have? But in terms of this piece first, what gave you this idea? How many magazines do you go through? Do you sit up at night? When do you come up with all these ideas?
But my mother being an archivist and historian, my father also being a really serious history buff, I kind of got it honest, But also, my grandmother, who just passed away at 100 years old, I have one gripe with her, which was that when I was 5 or 6, every time I would go to my grandmother's house, I'd be like, photo albums, and then I would take the albums, I would take all the albums, and then I would rearrange all the images, photoify them by who's in, and then I would separate the color images from the black and white images, because I always thought that the world before I was born was black and white, because all the pictures before. And so she hid all of the photo albums from me since I was 6 or 7. I still have not seen them, but I have images burned in my head, and I'm like, they're like, these are the albums. Like, no, these are not the albums that I'm looking for, because I drew some of the pictures, so I know I made my mark. But so I think I've always been fascinated with archives, and partially because my mother, on her first book, but many of her books, she's published over 2 dozen, maybe 3 dozen books by now, mostly around images of African Americans and how they're represented in society. And her first book, though, was called Black Photographers, 1840 to 1940, a biobibliography. And this book, which is powerful when you just consider the title, Black Photographers, 1840 to 1940. This idea that there were African Americans who were making photographs at the very beginning of photography really tells a very different story about at least some aspects of the American story. You know, to be a black photographer in 1840 meant that you had to have some level of education, whether it was hard taught, self-taught, or another way. You had some interest in chemistry and physics and mechanics. You had some means to kind of get not only, you know, the camera, but also the chemicals and the glass plates or whatever to print them. And then you also had a curiosity and a passion that led you to do all of this. And that story, doing that almost three decades before the Emancipation Proclamation was written, means that there is a lot more to tell about the antebellum American experience than we know, but also that African Americans surprisingly saw African Americans very differently than people in mainstream society did. And so that's part of the thing that I'm interested in looking at the archive. I find every archive is almost, it's like a time capsule, or it's a portal into the past. It's a window into the past that we can learn even more about than reading books and hearing oral history in certain cases.
Hit the next one.
And so this is a piece which I was really happy because it did not exist in this way until we talked. I was fortunate enough to have a survey show at the Portland Art Museum, which opened in 2019, just a few months before the pandemic. And so a lot of people saw it when it traveled, or maybe just one, two, great. But I was able to put my cousin's words. So it says love rules here, but if you look closely, you'll see there's an over here. So it moves from saying love rules to love over rules. But I was able to put my cousin's words on the outside of the museum. Actually, there's also a version at the Brooklyn Museum that's still up currently. During the uprisings in Portland throughout 2020, this was a place where a site of a lot of tension, a lot of scary moments. But somehow this was not vandalized, even though a statue across the way was. And so I don't know. There's so much art in public space, but most of it is telling us to buy a product. And a lot of what I'm interested in is selling ideas that are hopefully that are inspiring.
You've done. I didn't put any images up, but you've done a lot of the series with athletes, and you had written for anyone. It's written about him. For anyone familiar with Thomas, it may come as a surprise that he would celebrate the NBA with such a project, given his work has often been critical of the intersection of sports, commerce, and black men. And you did a work, the Cotton Bowl. Tell us about your work with about.
So yeah, you have some of my quilts here.
Yes.
Well, again, popular culture is so powerful, mostly because it's a one-way conversation to the consumer or to the audience. I believe that it can be a multifaceted conversation when we choose to recognize that anything that's forced down our throats is something that we can digest and process and put back into the world. And anyway, I'm not calling my work defecation. I'm not, but it's a joke. Get it? But there's that's the thing. I'm all this information is jammed down my throat. I know stats about athletes that are totally irrelevant to my life. I know more about them than I do about what's happening in my body or my health. And I realized that this stage sports manifests is really, it has there's a reason that we're so fascinated by it. It's because sports are about living in the present. It's about the now, what I do with what's right in front of me right now, and the ball being a metaphor for how we manipulate the present to our will is something that is really kind of a powerful lesson. And so when we see someone, it look on the surface is just a guy putting a ball through a hoop, but it's also about this person who's actually choosing to kind of take all of their attention, everything they've ever learned, and focus it towards a very specific goal. And what we saw in sports, for instance, the NBA, where a lot of the early athletes were immigrants, Jewish immigrants, Eastern European immigrants, and then eventually African Americans, and now Africans and other people from other parts of disenfranchised or served communities, is that this is one of the few places where people who are not seen as important get to be seen as important, because they can still take the now and make it theirs, seize the moment. And so my work, I'm so fascinated with kind of how a lot of these athletes now in the past 10 years, LeBron James especially, have kind of decided that since we have your attention here, we can use it to talk about other things, which was something that happened during the civil rights movement. Didn't happen for many years when athletes started to make a lot of money. What's next? Keep the Faith, baby. So when I was a kid, my mother had a pin that was Adam Clayton Powell Jr. pin for his campaign in 1968, saying "Keep the Faith, baby." I didn't know that until like much later. But I was really drawn by it's probably the first words I actually read. Keep the Faith, baby. I'm serious, because it was like right next to her bed, this pen, which I still have. And I was like, I didn't understand why it was saying baby. I'm like, because am I a baby, etc. But there's also this, if you think about what it means that I was given this message from a child, keep the faith, baby. Like it's so relevant in every moment of my life. Keep the faith, keep the faith. And I just made a series of prints based off of that pen. That you must have. Hit the button. All right. Oh, wow. Okay. Wait, you added to this. See, do you have all of this work? Wow. Okay.
A little bit more.
And a little bit more. Wow.
Talk about this amazing piece in that series.
Okay. Well, this is, told you. Oh, thank you, Jordan.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I get emotional also because it's, obviously, there's. I'm not the only artist. I'm sure there's probably 100 artists in this who are exhibiting here, or maybe even today, that you're supporting. But there's also something that's really important for me to remember as a father, as a parent, that like a lot of your support, definitely your support was able to help. I was able to buy my first home, and that's like a big deal. I told you I didn't have a home until I was 35. So being able to get a home at 45, largely because of your during the pandemic, really was a huge thing, which, if I have another kid, Jordan Schnitzer, Willis Thomas. But I grew up also, as I said, with, I love the United States of America. I would like to consider myself a patriot. Part of loving it, as James Baldwin talked about, is being willing to critique her, as he said. And what I love about being an artist is that we understand that critique is what makes us better, right? If no one's willing to give us critique, then we're probably not doing anything important. Whereas in most other parts of society, critique is seen as something we want to avoid. And in this case, I am both acknowledging our values in our society, but also critiquing it. We are in the quote unquote land of the free, but we have from that moment and always imprisoned more people than anyone else in the world, either through chattel slavery, which now continues under the form of mass incarceration, where the 13th Amendment said, and I saw actually the physical 13th Amendment just 2 days ago in Arkansas. It was handwritten. It's pretty amazing. I have it on my phone if you want to look at it. But it says, slavery shall be abolished except in the case of punishment for a crime. And as we know, punishment for a crime could be just a black man occupying space that people don't want him in. So, and that is true even today. If you're on a corner and somebody doesn't want you there, you will become a slave. And I think about justice for not just African Americans, but for far too many people in the society, it is a maze that you have to navigate. And so this piece is made with, I made them with prison uniforms and American flags, because I realized that the flags, the stripes on the American flag just coincidentally are exactly the same width of the flags in prison uniforms. And so this navigation of American justice is what this work is about.
I want to talk about this piece that we just bought
today.
Well, I bought it a week ago, but talk about this piece.
Well, and this work is heavy. My cousin was murdered in 2000, and I carry that pain, as I said, every day of my life, every probably hour, every minute. But when I think that just in this country alone, since he died, there are almost 300 people shot and killed by another person since he died, which is crazy. And it's even crazier when you think that almost 1 million people in this country have been shot and killed when you add suicides to that. And just in the context of homicide, to know that there are more people killed every year than more Americans killed every year than who were killed in the 20 years of wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. There's 4 times more people killed in 2021 than were killed in those 2 foreign wars. It says a lot about where we're spending our money, where we're spending our energy, and what our values are. And we don't have any memorials. We'll have rightfully memorials for fallen soldiers, but what about the everyday people who are fallen stars in my eyes? And so this in the back is, I think, 27 with Jack Shaman Galleries here, giving me cues.
The front one is 21. The rear one is 20. I think
18. So, but it's 1 star for every year. Every person who was killed in 2021 is the one in the foreground, and it's around 20,000 stars for people who were killed during a pandemic year where most of us were locked down. Sadly, there was an increase in gun violence during the pandemic, which is shocking when you really think about it, because most of us were home. But also, I guess, in that was reflective of the pain that a lot of people were carrying.
Why don't you go to the next one? I think it's one more. Go, keep going. There you go. So this is the work. Why don't you talk about the color cap? I want to talk about this.
Okay. This is based off of this. So my show, and I had a show. I got to do a residency or a fellowship at Harvard at the Du Bois Institute in 2010. This is run by Henry Louis Gates, and one of the things that they have all throughout the offices are all of these posters of African American films and cinemas, and one of the common themes on all the posters from the 30s and 40s was all colored cast, and I thought that was such a fascinating term, and all colored cast. Not only because it was a promotion that this is a black film, but also you think about the spectrum of color within the African American community, also thinking about film being black and white. So both the metaphor at the time of film being black and white, but also it was segregated. I was really fascinated with that. And then there was a show at a Warhol exhibition at the Whitney, and there's a piece called 36 Ethel Skulls. And it's these 36 different portraits of her that he took on different color backgrounds, screen prints. And I decided to do a variation of that, looking at 36 stars, not only African American, but stars from basically 1930s to 1920s to the 60s, who were stars of segregated cinema. I was first mostly inspired by Anna May Wong, who was a person who was my mother's kind of muse as a child. She's going to be commemorated now on the quarter. Did you know that? It's pretty, and it's amazing for me because I only was fascinated with her because of my mom, and then I started making work I made a lot of pieces that were about Anime Wong. People were like, "You're Black American. Why are you making pieces about a Chinese American artist?" But obviously, I don't believe race is real. I know it's a fabrication, and I know it's designed to divide and conquer us. Of course, there's ethnicity and social differences, but race, as it's been enforced upon us, is a game, and it's a race where certain people get a head start, and that's something that Anime Wong, but also Sidney Poitier and
Desi Arnaz,
and so Pearl Bailey. It's a race that all of these other people, Step and Fetch It, were in. And I wanted to kind of, so to the naked eye, you will likely see it like this unless there's it's lit from a certain area, and then you get to kind of mire on all of these things that are like hidden in plain sight.
So when you look at it, you just see, like Ellsworth Kelly, all this color field. Then you take a picture with your iPhone with a flash, and suddenly all the images come through, or you look through goggles. Very interesting in terms of all the themes about that, just technically about hidden, not hidden, and all these people that broke through, folks of color. Fascinating. We've just got 1 or 2 minutes more, so let's talk about this amazing. Hank flew into Portland last Tuesday, and then he flew up to Walla Walla. There's a foundry in Walla Walla, Washington, founded by a guy named Mark Anderson. He's since passed away. His widow and 2 kids run it, and basically all the big artists have done casting there for decades. John Buck and Jim Dine, and I mean, tons of them. And this is about a 50-foot tall or 60-foot tall building. And tell about your commission for Boston for the Commons there.
Sure. So I was really inspired by a photograph of Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King embracing when he was given the Nobel Prize in 1963. And there's this picture, which I don't think we have here, shows him hugging her with so much glee, but also you can see that all of his weight is on her as he's hugging her. And I thought that was a really powerful metaphor for their relationship, where she carried his legacy for almost half a century after he was assassinated. But it was through their love that so many of us were able to feel their love and continue to see it in society. We don't have a place we have civil rights, but we don't have like a place for civic joy or civic love to be really highlighted. And we have all of these monuments to heroes of war and victims of war, but not very many monuments to love or nonviolence. And so Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King met in Boston as students. I believe she was at the Berklee School of Music and he was at Boston University. To think of them as refugees from the segregated South in the segregated North, with all of these ambitions, all these hopes and dreams, but to see each other and say, we want to be together, and through their love, change society was something I was really inspired by. And so the embrace is a metaphor for that. This is a smaller version of it that you can see for 24 hours at Jack Shaman Gallery. But we were in
that smaller version at Jack Shaman Gallery.
Yeah.
That bronze sort of one that's like this big.
Yeah.
It's sold today. I couldn't help myself. The big one is absolutely magnificent. I think it will have the same effect that the Bean does in Chicago when we walked in. So let me ask you, when you walked in, because it's the pandemic, you hadn't been there yet, when you walked in and saw this 40-foot high giant thing, what did you think?
I mean, it's humbling. It's humbling to think that what my work is just a reflection of the world that I live in, and so I can't believe that I get to reflect this, and to think that for me, I don't even think it's an ego thing to know that possibly if I ever have grandchildren or great-grandchildren, that this is going to be something that's going to be seen as part of their legacy. This is a part of their mission, but also to think about the millions of people who will come to the sculpture and be inspired to embrace, hopefully not only people they know, but to metaphorically to embrace a stranger, which will likely also happen. Calling space for that and have that, and Boston Common, which is the oldest continuously used public space on the continent, is really it's a really amazing thing, and it was so wonderful to have you come up almost impromptu to see it, and then for you to know now that you were so moved by it, and now that it will have, you know, be part of your family's legacy is super meaningful to me.
So if I can just indulge you for 3 more minutes because we've gone the hour, but let me ask you a couple of tough questions here.
I'm a Pisces.
There was and I think it's been wonderful to have you talk about how you grew up and the influence in your parents and being here and so forth. Are you a black artist or an artist who is black?
I'm a person.
Your legacy, I mean, you're doing these major projects, which are very, very powerful, like this, about gender, race, this country's history. Is that your mission?
Well, and my friend Jennifer and Devin, and I see Max over there too, and they're people who I work with very closely. They get to see me all the time. For me, my creative practice is how I show up every day. Like every moment of our lives, we get to practice being creative. You know, we get to practice because I'm performing. Like you're performing, and what you're wearing, you're performing. And so often I walk around the world like, you know, I gotta be here. I'm late. I messed up, or so and so. You know, I got gas. But like, really, I have the fortune of being able to like look at all of these people, all of these smiling people, all of these smiling people, all of these smiling people. I can't see your face color. All these smiling people. Like, to me, that's the art. I got to make everybody smile. Like, and so like the creativity for me, the fact that I get to call myself, I do refer to myself as a person because hopefully one day, well, sadly, a lot of people won't see me as a person and don't see me as a person, but I believe the more that I can reinforce that, the more likelihood that someone might remember that at a critical time. But when I think about myself as an artist, as a creative, I think about you as an artist, as a creator, and we know you are, and all of us have this ability to create, but it's not just what the marks we leave on paper or on metal, it's the marks we leave on hearts, most importantly our own. And so I'm just really grateful to get to do that every day.
Well, I think we're also grateful that you do that every day, and we're the beneficiaries. Hank Willis Thomas, it was just an incredible afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Incredible.